Yeah.
Yes. So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome you to the 4 o'clock session of Colloquia Ceranea, to the panel Infidels, Heresies, and Heresiology in the Byzantine World. Our first speaker is Boris Stojkovski from the Faculty of Arts of the University in Novi Sad from the History Department. And his paper is titled Saint Sava and Konstantin Mihailović, Two Serbian Medieval Views on Islam. So without further ado, I give the word to Boris.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. I would first like to thank our dear organizers from the University of Lodz for their kind invitation and for accepting my paper this year too.
Boris, sorry, I have did something wrong and you are muted. I want to mute everyone apart from you because there was some echo effect. Sorry, you have that's manually switch on. Yeah, I'm
Okay.
sorry.
Can you hear me now? Is everything fine? Okay, so I'll continue.
Sorry.
I'll continue. So my topic for this year is something I was actually, I can say not working on that thoroughly, but more of studying it quite slowly for the last couple of years, something that is quite interesting, and that is the Serbian medieval view of Islamic religion and Islam as a whole. Actually, the main point is that the first true contact of Serbs with Islamic faith was the Turkish invasion of the Balkan Peninsula. Therefore, it was more or less connected with the Ottomans as the enemies, as the conquerors of the Balkan Peninsula, of the Byzantine Commonwealth, in which is also Serbia counted. So Ottomans are mostly treated Turks as evil, and less the aspect is on their religion, apart of some couple of moments that are mentioned, and of course the key are the two. I will speak about them later. There are numerous examples of that furor turcorum, the fear of the Turks, that can be found in the late medieval Serbia, mostly from the 80s of the 14th century, the 8th decade of the 14th century. And for example, even in them, we cannot find some direct mention of Islamic religion as something bad or horrible. It is mostly the stress on the Ottomans. For example, the so-called writing of the Marmor Column, the monument erected right after the Battle of Kosovo in 1389. The writing is attributed to Prince Lazar Hrebeljanović's son, later Prince and Despot Stephen Lazarević. It is mentioned, the religion is only mentioned from the Christian aspect as a martyrdom and martyr death of Prince Lazar against Murad I. Of course, with those slight mentions of infidels, and for example, the definitions like race of aspen, serpent, whelp of lion, and basilisk, as both Murad I and his son Bayezid are noted. But some direct relations towards the Islamic religion can be found only directly in the two writings. The one of them is by first Serbian Archbishop and one of the most important, maybe even the key figure of medieval Serbia, Sava Nemanjić, canonized as Saint Sava. And the second, so completely two different persons from two different epochs. Sava Nemanjić living in the late 12th and the early 13th century, whilst Konstantin Mihailović, who was a Serbian Janissary, lived in the 15th century and died at the beginning of the 16th century. So two completely different destinies, two completely different careers, which have both bring to the light their, or not only their, opinion considering Islam. So Sava Nemanjić, or Saint Sava, he was born under the name Rastko. It is widely supposed that he's born around 1165. He was the son of Grand Prince Stefan Nemanja, and from his youth he was supposed to be, as ruler's son, he ruled a part of medieval Serbian territories, the region of Hum or Zahumlje. But already around the age of 16, he became monk at the Mount Athos. His first two destinations were the Russian monastery of St. Panteleimon, because he went or escaped, as the Vitas, his hagiography says, with the Russian monk who came to the court of his father. And the second, and far more important for this topic too, but also for his complete education, is 7 years of his life and monastic life and work in the Vatopedi monastery, also on Mount Athos. He's one of the very interesting, and I say that without a doubt, a key figure of Serbian medieval period. He was, and that's most important, in 1219 he went to Nicaean Empire, where he was ordained the autocephalous Archbishop of Serbia by the Patriarch Manuel I Saranten Haritopoulou, and with, of course, permission by the emperor. Then he became the first and the most important diplomat of his brother and the first crowned Serbian king, his brother Stephen, also known as the first crowned in historiography. He was a founder of, alongside his father, a monastery of Hilandar on Mount Athos, and partially we can say that he was a co-founder of the monastery of Studenica. He was also an important writer, first Serbian poet, very important theologian and traveler. Both of these are of great importance for this topic. And finally, we can say that he was the first Serbian lawgiver of the medieval period. So in a way, his work, the Nomocanon, is actually something that is in the focus of the first part of my presentation today. Nomocanon is actually, as it is well-known Greek name, he took it and translated it into Zakonopravilo, which is a literal translation from Greek to Serbian Slavonic. In Russian, this legal compilation had the name Krmchia, and in Russia it was very often printed from the late 16th century, from the time of the first Russian Emperor Tsar Ivan IV until the First World War. There were numerous editions of Nomocanon of Saint Sava. So, as it can be seen, I will not come into details considering the contents of Zakonopravilo of Nomocanon of Saint Sava. So, as it is already seen from its 7 introductory chapters, it is taken from the Byzantine canon law. It is directly interpretations of Nicene Creed and all other main postulates of the Christian, the Orthodox faith. After different other parts in 63 chapters that follow this introduction for this topic, then most important are the last 3 from 61 to 63. These are dedicated on different heresies. Just in brief, there is a quite large importance of Nomocanon of Saint Sava. It was never put out of use since the Dušan's Code, which were mentioned earlier today in a session by Paolo Angelini. It never stopped being used in practice, as it is known, because the Dušan's Code does not cover all branches of law. Therefore, Nomocanon also does not. So, in a way, these two permeate in the late medieval period. The most important is that it was a large and strong Roman Byzantine influence, many different legal transplants. Most of the translations are direct, some of them not, of course, but there are a lot of Sava's own interpretations. He well knew Greek language. There are many, let's say, novelties that are really, let's say, revolutionary for medieval Serbia, like parts connecting to social justice in a way, so under quotation marks, of course. Most of all these, the protection of poor, the more human treatment of slaves, etc., are taken from the different Byzantine Nomocanons or from different Byzantine legal compilations. I only wanted to give this as a small introduction on the Nomocanon of Saint Sava, rather than to stress anything particular, because on the topic which is key for today, it is important to say that Saint Sava mostly took directly and translated from Greek parts of certain Byzantine authors, which I shall discuss in a moment. So on one side, we have Saint Sava's personal experience. He was an important diplomat, as I said, and twice undertook a voyage to the Holy Land. So he went twice to a pilgrimage to Palestine, to Jerusalem. On one of these voyages, he went also to Mount Sinai, and according to his hagiographies, he met with the Sultan of Babylon, as he's mentioned in the both Vitas of Sava. Already in science, in scholarly circles, he was that Sultan of Babylon was identified with Al-Kamil, who ruled in that period. Therefore, it was quite interesting part where, of course, it is said that Babylonian Sultan is hostile to the Christians, but he gave some kind of guide. So let's say he gave some entourage to Sava, who then visited the Holy Mount of Sinai. On the other hand, so it seems that his personal experience with Al-Kamil was quite good. He was well received by the Muslim Sultan. He was really respected there. But on the other hand, in the Nomocanon, there is part on Islam where it is considered, as in other Byzantine works, which are actually those who made influence on work of Sava and Nemanjić, actually only the views of, let's say, Byzantine theology. So I will clarify myself at any second. So large Byzantine influences, the most important is of Epiphanius of Cyprus and his book on heresies, which is actually followed by the treatise on Islam by Saint John of Damascus. It is the 100th heresy, the well-known. And after this part, there is a short treatise of also, and today and yesterday mentioned Georgios Monachos, George the Monk from the 9th century, his brief part on Muhammad. I only found the edition in Patrologia Greca. So he translated also that part on Muhammad, as he's called in Serbian Slavonic. So these parts are undoubtedly translated from Greek into Serbian Slavonic. Some key points here that Prophet Muhammad is, of course, like in the works of John of Damascus, treated as someone who wrote nonsense. The parts that Sava stresses are actually completely the same as that of John of Damascus. There is a part on polygamy, or to say that he lists writings of Prophet Muhammad. They're actually the parts of the Holy Quran, with polygamy. Then the discussion with Islamic scholars who accuse Christians that believe in two gods, and the Savas, that is John of Damascus' response that Muslims too believe in prophets. So it is impossible that if those prophets transfer to us the teaching of a one God, it is impossible for Christians to believe in two gods. There are also all parts in John of Damascus translated by Sava of the paradise, of the concept of Jannah in Islam. Finally, then there is the part of the short part of George the Monk of Georgios Monachos from the 9th century on Muhammad, who is of course accused of being an impostor in this period. And finally, it comes to anathema and cursing Saracens and their faith. There is also a small part that is dedicated to the baptism of the Muslims and to the procedure to say when they actually are baptized to the Christian faith. These are some parts of the transcription of Ilovica. I am apologizing that they are not scanned. So it is the oldest preserved manuscript of the Nomocanon of Saint Sava, dating from 1262. and these are the parts actually that are connected and are dedicated to the part of Saint John of Damascus, so to his translation, followed by the part of anathema, or cursing Muslims there, here, as well as in the work of Saint John of Damascus, known as Saracens. So in Serbian, Sarakini. He here also stresses always calling them Saracens, and their faith is called Vera Sarakinska, or that is the faith of the Saracens. So this is first part. So this is the work of Sava Nemanja. The second, let's say almost two centuries later, was Konstantin Mihailović. He was from Ostrovica near Novo Brdo, the most important Serbian medieval mine. And he was taken as a Janissary after the fall of Novo Brdo in 1455, which he writes in his memoirs. It seems that he was present but did not take active participation in the siege of Belgrade in 1456. He was still even though he was in quite mature age, he was 33 years old when he was taken prisoner. He was quite still young, so to say, as a Janissary. He wasn't trained enough well to participate in such an important siege. On the other hand, in 1463, he participated in different campaigns against Vlad III and in campaigns against Bosnia. He was captured by Hungarians, then repatriated, and after that he fled to Poland. Most probably from 1497 to 1501, he wrote a Turkish chronicle, Kronika Turecka. It is most probably written in Old Polish, but the oldest manuscripts are in Old Polish and in Old Czech. Actually, it is widely accepted that he wrote that in Old Polish because he thought that the Polish king was the only one in that time who can stop the Turks. Main idea was to provide as much as detailed account on the Ottoman states, on the Ottoman military, all in order to assist the Polish king and other Christian powers in their struggle against the Ottomans. I only here presented two wonderful pictures of Novo Brdo fortress in order to locate his Konstantin Mihailović's origin. And here you can see there is this is Stolz's English edition of his memoirs, of Kronika Turecka, so-called memoirs of a Janissary. It is the edition of parallel Polish text with English translation. I chose this one only for let's say an illustration for everybody, because the translation is in English. There are numerous other good editions. There is German edition of Konstantin Mihailović, as well as an interesting 2-volume Danish translation with comments. It's done by Slavic from Denmark. Of course, there is also a Serbian edition already done in the period of interwar Kingdom of Yugoslavia, but it has some very important lackings. So already he begins his memoirs, his work, with explaining the religion of Islam. Of course, he calls them all ignoble heathens. He uses for them in the original text, it is pohane, which is quite similar to pagans. So it's something that in all Slavic languages is more or less similar. So they are okay. Thank you. So his key parts are considered of the faith. He is very hostile towards Muslims and Muhammad himself, and something that is quite interesting, that he has a quite detailed account on Ali, which is of course mostly part of the influence, being a Janissary and being educated at that time, most probably still in Edirne, in Enderun, where the cult of Ali was very, very strong. So I will only briefly now explain what is he writing about. So beside the faith, Ali has a very important place. He names him the successor of Muhammad. So mostly, let's say, almost according to the Shia Islamic teachings. He also writes on mosques, religious services, forbidding wine. And quite interestingly, he describes two accounts. He was present at two Juma prayers and heard two sermons. One is on the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and the second is on prohibition for Muslims to visit Christians, which are named Kauri, as it is quite well known. He has a very, very strong anti-Turkish and both anti-Muslim sentiment. He's still very familiar with his Serbian origin and Serbian tradition. So unlike many Janissaries who just converted and went on living as Muslims, Konstantin Mihailović was completely different from many of them. And something that is quite interesting, that is good for discussion, is that strong cult of Ali, which is here strongly emphasized among the Janissaries. Maybe a possible Anatolian influence, but also maybe a very possible strong Persian or Shia influence. So here we can see two completely different accounts. I will now only as brief as possibly summarize. Sava's view is on one side theological. It is completely consistent with Byzantine heresiology, Byzantine hagiography. On the other hand, his personal experience is much more different. On the other hand, Konstantin Mihailović, being a Janissary, provided a quite interesting account on Islam, having a very strong anti-Turkish and anti-Islamic note. Also to be important that his personal experience with Turks is also very much negative, since he saw them conquering his country, his city, his family, and enslaving him personally, and he never came under any Islamic influence whatsoever. I thank you very much for your kind attention, and I apologize if I have skipped the time.
Thank you very much, Boris. This was really a fascinating presentation. Thank you. And if you don't mind, we will again do the discussion at the end of the session. And so I would like to present our second presenter, which is Ivelin Ivanov from the Department of Ancient and Medieval History of the University of Veliko Tarnovo. And the presentation is titled Crusading in Livonia and Romania, and of the 12th till the beginning of the 13th century, an attempt at a comparative approach. Ivelin, the word is yours.
Thank you, Petra. I hope, dear colleagues, that you can hear me well. Yes or no?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, and now I will share my presentation. I hope that you can see it. Yes or no?
Yes, I can see. I can see it. Yes.
Okay.
I hope everyone else can too.
Sorry. First of all, I'd like to express my thanks to the organizers of this event. It seems that nowadays and in years to come, we will have more and more such events. I mean, from distance, because of the current COVID situation. But I think that not only because of the COVID, this practice will continue in future years. And now I would like to focus your attention to the topic. Actually, I presented it with the draft text of my paper, which will be published in Colloquia Ceranea. The idea of such a comparative research appeared a few years ago because the Crusaders in Livonia and in the Balkan Peninsula at the beginning of the 13th century haven't been explored or studied in a comparative way, in a comparative approach. And now with this presentation, I would like to share with you some ideas and some views on such a comparative research. The late 12th and the early 13th century were characterized by intense crusade movement directed in not only on the southeast, the Balkans and the Byzantine Empire especially, but also in the Eastern Baltic, the so-called Livonian Crusade and Crusades. What was common between the specific about the Livonian Crusade from the first half of the 13th century and the Fourth Crusade, for example, is one of the questions. What were the motives, the driving forces, and the ultimate goals of the papal policy in the Baltic region and the Balkans at the beginning of the 13th century? Is another question. What were the consequences of these crusades for the Baltic and Balkan peoples? What were the shared and distinguishing characteristics in the Terra Mariana, founded in 1207, and the Latin Empire and other crusading states in the former Byzantine Romania after 1204? What was the scale of commercial activities also involved in the Livonian Crusade and in the Fourth Crusade? What were the general and specific trends in the history of the southeastern region and of the East Baltic region in the first three decades of the 13th century? This presentation is aimed at mapping out the main problems and a brief historiographical overview or review, but just to point that the historiographical review will be given in the paper, and now I will share with you only the ideas for main issues or subtopics of such a comparative research between Livonia and former Byzantine Romania, or the Latin states on the Balkans. The crusade activity in the Baltic and Byzantine and neighboring Byzantine territories has a long history, various aspects of research, but one of the common features is its permanence in the years after the initial conquest. In the lands of Eastern Baltic, it manifested itself in a new military campaigns led by some military orders, for example, the Order of Swordsmen, the Teutonic Order, the Bishop of Riga, the Danish Crown, and other military and political factors. Similarly, a series of crusades were proclaimed for the defense of the Frankish states, which were set up in the formerly Byzantine territories. Yet, despite their importance, I hope you can hear me.
Sorry, Ivelin, I have switched to another view. It will be more legible for everyone. I can change slides for you. We are on the second slide, if I'm right.
Yes, despite their importance, today these expeditions and crusading activities have not been systematically examined in a comparative approach, as I mentioned at the start of my presentation. The only close studies have been devoted to comparative research between the Crusaders in the Iberian Peninsula and the Baltic region, and between the Baltic Crusades and the Holy Lands, or the Crusades orientated to the Holy Lands. In Bulgarian historiography, or Bulgarian historiography 2 lacks a comparative study on the mentioned processes in Livonia and Romania during the first decades of the 13th century. The historical parallels between Livonia and Romania have been partially explored to sum up. However, as far as research on the Baltic Crusades is concerned, the period is subject of numerous research work. I will not mention the names and the studies. I will put it in my paper. Some words about the comparative approach. The comparative approach has a long tradition dating back to the ancient world. Since the 19th century, it is a very wide use to achieve various objectives. For researchers adopting a normative perspective, comparisons have served as a tool for developing classification of social phenomena, for establishing whether the shared phenomena can be explained by same causes. For many researchers, comparisons have provided an analytical framework for examining and explaining social and cultural differences and specificities. A research study on this topic, comparative view on Livonia and former Byzantine Romania, requires a comparative, such or similar comparative historical and intercultural analysis, thus aiming at and emphasizing the similarities and substantial differences between Livonia and the Balkans in the first half of the 13th century. In my opinion, if we try to put chronological borders, the beginning can be set at the start of the Livonian Crusade in 1189, or the very end of the 12th century and the beginning of the 13th century. In fact, only 4 years separate this year from the beginning of the Fourth Crusade in 1204. Following the above, the starting chronological date of such a research can be fixed in 1189. At the end can be marked by Gregory IX attempted expeditions in defense of the Latin Empire in the years 1238-1240. Such a comparative study requires careful identification of key issues and subtopics. In the first place, I will define the evolution of crusading in the context of political circumstances across Europe, the role of the papal policy in Livonia and Romania in the first decades of the 13th century. One of the specific objectives regarding the issues is the Vatican politics from the first half of the 13th century, especially the pontificates of Innocent III, Honorius III, and Gregory IX. Also, the role of the pontificate of Pope Gregory IX and the apogee of the crusading activity against Ioan III Vatatzes and Ioan II Asen in helping Latin Romania must be emphasized in such a comparative research. But in the wider topic of the Crusades in Livonia and Romania, more general issues can be distinguished. In the second place, I could put the military strategy, the role of military orders, the armaments and tactics of the opposing sides, opposing armies in these large-scale and protracted military conflicts. Among the important topics are the role of the military orders in Livonia and the Balkans. And here I can see the very important role and the possibility to draw parallels between the influence of the Teutonic order in Livonia, but also in former Romania, Byzantine Romania. What I mean is the role of the Teutonic order in on the southeastern borders of Hungarian Kingdom in the second decade of the 13th century, when the order fight against the Cumans. Also, I would like to stress the fact that Greeks, Bulgarians, and the Baltic people succeeded in fighting against the Crusaders by forming alliances against the powerful knights. In parallel, Lithuanians and some Russian principalities played an important role in the military conflicts in Livonia in the first decades of the 13th century. A similar role in the south was played by the Bulgarians, who in alliance with Cumans, the Vlachs, and at times with the Greeks in Thrace, entered into a sharp conflict with the newly established Latin Empire. What were the political, religious, and cultural motivation for such a confrontation is one of important questions in such a subtopic, and what were the consequences for the local societies as a result of these wars, of these conflicts. Quite interesting are also the attempts of Novgorod and the Galician Principality to exert political influence in Livonia and in the Balkans in the context and aftermath of the Crusades under consideration. In 1216, the Novgorod Prince Mstislavich led Novgorod troops into Livonia, as far as Riga. In a similar manner, and roughly at the same time, a civil war for the throne broke out in Bulgaria, one of the opposing parties being supported by Russian mercenaries from the Haliç or Galician Principality. Another important problem or issue in such a comparative study is Livonia and Latin Empire as crusader states. The considered events and processes lead to the emergence of a new political organization and significant changes in the region. There is also immediate influence on part of the neighboring states, their powers in crusading activities in the Eastern Baltic, the Southern Balkans, and Western Asia Minor. Some of the authors consider the formation of medieval Livonia and the Latin Empire and the construction of a new feudal system. Without doubt, these characteristics in Livonia and Romania are very specific, but at the same time, some basic parallels can be drawn, providing a basis for a comparative study on the clash between local traditions and the Western European feudal system. Of crucial importance was also the role of commercial interest in crusade activity in Livonia and Romania, and in my view, it's a quite interesting issue and topic. For example, if we compare this commercial influence and interests in these two regions, in crusading activity in these two regions, we can underline the following facts. The larger population on the shores and adjacent areas around the Mediterranean Sea generated a much larger volume of trade than the peoples in Livonia and in the Baltic Sea. Next, unlike the merchants of the Hanseatic League, who established a solid cartel, the Italian merchants couldn't afford such a course of action. Also, the significance of winter routes along the frozen rivers and lakes in Livonia in comparison to southern and southeastern Europe should be highlighted in such comparative research. Furthermore, based on comparison with Venetian and Genoese trade in the Mediterranean Sea, the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov, the conclusion can be drawn that the longer routes of the Italians involved more risk factors. The longer routes also suggested in this aspect, Livonia was in control of relatively shorter and more easily accessible routes with summer and winter options. This contributed to the flourishing of trade in that region, but it could also be pointed out that the Hanseatic merchants formed a stable cartel based on their exclusive trade privileges. Such behavior was possible only for a few decades for Venetians as a result of the Fourth Crusade. So there are many differences between, and also some common features, but many differences between the influence of the merchants and the commercial activity on the crusading activity in these two regions. Last but not least comes the need for a comparative study of the clash and cooperation as a result of the Crusades in Livonia and Romania during the first decades of the 13th century. Traditionally seen as sharp opposition and conflict, these crusaders are increasingly the subject of a different research approach and research methodology. Many contemporary historians see Livonia and the Latin Empire not only as areas of conflict but also of coexistence and mutual influence and intertwining of different cultural identities. Next, according to some researchers of the Baltic Crusades, significant demographic change in the form of mass movement of local tribes which mixed in a proto-national community started as a result of the Crusades in the 13th century. Indisputably, the Livonian Crusade had a terrible effect on the local population, but from another point of view, they also accelerated the process of unification of the local tribes. Besides, collision and interactions have many other dimensions. Similarly, the Fourth Crusade and its result, in the former Byzantine Empire and neighboring lands resulted not only in sharp enmity but in mutual influences and the emergence of new identities and new cultural models in the land of Romania. Thus, the proposed main problem and topics as specified above in the borders chronological specified above provide, in my opinion, a framework for a new and promising comparative study whose key purpose is to study the similarities and distinctive characteristics of the Crusades in these two remote regions of Eastern Europe. I hope that the final results will be both compelling and useful in the research of the broader topics of the Crusades, a subject which has provoked and will continue to arouse strong interests among medievalists. Thank you for your kind attention. Thank you again to the organizers for this event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ivelin, for a very interesting paper. And now I would like to welcome Silvia Notarfonso among us. Silvia, please correct me if I'm wrong. I was looking for your association yesterday late at night, and I found that you're a joint PhD candidate at the University of Macerata, and it was Loran in Budapest. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
So your paper is Giulio Mancinelli, a Jesuit missionary between Dalmatia and Constantinople, 1575 to 1586. So,
Yes, I have a question. Is it possible to share the PowerPoint presentation? Because I don't know how to do that.
Silvia, it's possible.
Yep.
You have to just push the button, share your screen. It's next to the button microphone on the video window.
It said that someone else is sharing his screen, so I cannot do that.
Ivelin, please stop sharing screen.
Okay. Okay, sorry.
No, sorry. Okay.
I hope it's okay.
It's okay. We may try now with your presentation.
Yeah. Okay. Can you see the presentation?
Yeah. Yes,
okay.
yes.
Okay. So, Ignatius of Loyola, alongside his first companions, founded the Society of Jesus in 1540. The society, as you know, since the very beginning of its existence, devoted plenty of efforts to missionary work. Here is a quite famous engraving from Imago Primi Seculi. Here it is. From Imago Primi Seculi Societatis Jesu, referring to the Jesuit missionary enterprise. The caption, which is rather telling, reads, Unus non sufficit orbis, one word is not enough. It is very well known that the young Jesuits were more than willing to join overseas missions, as proved by their lettere indipete, the letters which they used to send to the superior general to apply for extra-European missions. But was it common among the young Jesuits to choose the Ottoman lands as their preferred destination? A wide variety of indipete shows very clearly that three of the most common destinations were China, Japan, and the Americas. But on the contrary, Ottoman countries ended up being less popular and subsequently less fortunate. However, as Professor Emanuele Colombo has noted, since the very beginning of his spiritual activity, Ignatius seemed to realize the need to spread Catholicism among Muslims. On 15 August 1534, he and his first companions made a very singular vow, promising to go on a mission to the Holy Land. Should that have not been possible, they would have gone to Rome at the service of Pope Paul III, willing to serve as missionaries, quotation, even among Turks, end of quotation. And in fact, Ignatius never abandoned his ambivalent attitude towards towards Muslims, in which warlike and peaceful approaches existed side by side. And another prominent Jesuit, Antonio Possevino, kept following this ambivalent twofold path. As it has been noted in his literary work Bibliotheca Selecta, on the one hand, he develops a negative portrait of Muhammad and the Islamic religion, but on the other, he did also devote plenty of pages to the issue of the evangelization of Muslims, highlighting, for instance, the importance of learning Arabic and exploring the Islamic culture when doing so. The first Jesuit mission in Constantinople was established in 1583. Here we are. Next slide. Giulio Mancinelli, a Jesuit from Macerata in Italy, led the group of missionaries. Mancinelli authored an incredible number of autobiographical memoirs, which have not been published extensively yet. Here we will take into account his first still unpublished memoir entitled Storia della vocazione et peregrinazione, where he narrates the experiences he went through until 1604. He was born in 1537, and being the eldest son of a wealthy family, Mancinelli had access to an outstanding home library and spent his early years studying literature, philosophy, Latin, and mathematics, in which, according to his own testimony, he proved to be really gifted. He also read the Bible, of course, and was fascinated with looking at the pictures displayed in the Holy Book, even in the days before he could read it properly. In 1558, he finally entered the Society of Jesus in Loreto, in spite of his family's disapproval. He studied for 5 years at the Roman College, and then between 1570 and 1575, he served as the rector of the Jesuit College in Florence. He also started his missionary activity in Italy, and subsequently he carried it on in the Ottoman Empire and throughout Eastern and Central Europe. We can easily trace Mancinelli's journey across Europe, Asia, and North Africa by looking at the map that used to enrich one of the versions of the Storia now at the Jesuit archive in Rome. I had the chance to discuss this issue with Dr. Ovidiu Olar, and he suggested to look at the well-known map of Europe by Abraham Ortelius, published in 1595, as the model of the maps included in Mancinelli's manuscript. Indeed, Mancinelli started writing his Historia as late as 1602. So over the last 3 decades of the 16th century, he was extensively active abroad. Between 1575 and 1576, he served as a missionary in Dalmatia. Between 1583 and 1586, he was in Constantinople. And then he passed through the Balkans, East and Central Europe, on his way back to Italy. Eventually, in 1592, the Society of Jesus sent him to Algeria on behalf of the Kingdom of Naples to ransom a group of Christians who had been enslaved. If more attention has been devoted by scholars to Mancinelli's stays in Constantinople, his mission in the Dalmatian area has not been studied extensively yet. As far as I know, the only publication dealing specifically with his work in Ragusa and its surroundings is by the Croatian historian Mio Korade. Mancinelli arrived in Ragusa in 1575, following the invitation of the local archbishop, at that time Vincenzo Portico. Mancinelli was one of the first Jesuit missionaries to serve in that area, and he set the scene for the successful and long-lasting Balkan mission founded at the beginning of the 17th century by Bartol Kasic and Istvan Zini. Due to its strong Catholic tradition, Dalmatia, and especially the Republic of Ragusa, today Dubrovnik, ended up being crucial to the spread of the Roman Catholic faith, as it functioned as a sort of doorway for missionaries willing to enter the Balkan Ottoman territories. However, Mancinelli had also the chance to start dealing with the Turks, in other words, with the Muslims, as he missionized for a spell in Castelnuovo del Turco, present-day Erceg Novi in Montenegro, which was in those years an outpost of the Sublime Porte, being regained by the Ottoman army in 1539. In his autobiography, he describes the harsh spiritual conditions of local Catholics caused by a serious lack of educated priests. He also testifies that the Catholic community was financially strapped and could not afford to build more churches or repair the ruined ones, and thus they could barely celebrate the Holy Mass. Thus, Mancinelli was mainly involved with people who were already Catholic, although perhaps ignorant about religion. So this could be properly termed an interfideles mission. But how did he manage to communicate with the multitude of people living around Dubrovnik, Kotor, and Herceg Novi? Mancinelli writes that he used to speak Latin or even Italian, and an interpreter translated his word in lingua loro, in their own language. People, for their part, according to his own words, were very keen to listen to his sermons and desperate to acquire the little religious pictures which he frequently distributed. As a matter of fact, an object-based approach clearly shows up. He distributed many devotional keepsakes, and the congregation of people felt the urge to acquire one of the gifts, believing them to be miracle workers and more precious than gold. For example, one day while showing a picture of Virgin Mary to a local girl, aged around 8 or so, he asked her to identify the lady. As she reports, she correctly answered in linguaggio loro mazza boga, Madre di Dio, addressing the Mother of God using her own Slavic language. The picture virtually filled the linguistic gap between the missionary and the young lady. Religious imagery had a major role within Jesuit culture, and as they widely employed images in their missionary and pastoral works. There is, for instance, a famous letter that Francis Xavier wrote to Ignatius, which illustrates their extensive use as a visual bridge to communicate and spread religious concept among those who spoke languages Xavier could not understand. In this regard, one should not forget to mention the later illustrated catechism by Jesuit Giovan Battista Eliano, published in 1587, explicitly meant to help and instruct those who were not able to read. As I already noticed, Mancinelli complained about the lack of educated Catholic priests. Due to this issue, Orthodox clergy, he defines them as schismatics, frequently ended up serving Catholic people's religious needs. According to Mancinelli's narrative, for instance, they used to administer the sacraments, but often claimed economic compensation when doing that. Clearly, he is rather partisan and critical of them, also considering their teachings in terms of mistakes and superstitions. Moreover, he also bumped into former Christians who converted to Islam, but nevertheless kept celebrating marriage, administered baptism, and buried their dead according to Christian religious and ritual traditions, since they publicly acted as Muslims, but secretly still identified themselves otherwise. They were the so-called hidden Christians or crypto-Christians. According to Mancinelli, they merely intended to enhance their economic prospects by converting to Islam. Evenly enough, he vividly perceived the syncretic trait and the blurred religious boundaries which characterize local Catholicism, and devoted plenty of work to this issue. But apart from this religious and theological annotation, he also produced very interesting information about customs, traditions, lodgings, and economics activities carried out by people living in the territories he visited. As we read in the Historia, those who lived by the Adriatic Sea, for instance, mostly concentrated on fishing and producing oysters. Mancinelli then describes their oyster farms, also proving very specific details about how they operated. Those who inhabited the mountains, the Morlachia, Serbia, and Bosnia, on the other hand, used to be shepherd and raise goats, which guaranteed them a supply of meat and cheese. He testifies that while visiting the small villages in the mountains, more often than not, the only bread available was a flat bread baked under embers, and when that was scarce, they used to eat legumes, oysters, and ripe apples instead. Well, when he comes to the mission he established in Constantinople, we must say that Mancinelli wrote another comprehensive report entitled De Missione Patrum Societatis Iesu Constantinopolim a Gregorio Tertius Decimus, which has been studied and commented by a bunch of historians. On the contrary, the interesting pages from his Historia pertaining to the same mission have not been studied thoroughly yet. Mancinelli and his companions were supported by the Catholic community of Pera and Galata, nowadays district of Istanbul. He reports that the overriding majority of the people to whom he was meant to give assistance used to speak Italian, while others spoke French and Greek. Marin Temperizza, for his part, was able to speak Turkish, so according to Mancinelli's testimony, the Jesuit group virtually covered the entire range of local languages. So despite what he says in the incipit of the chapter, where he claims he's willing to be enslaved by the Ottomans, seeking a closer opportunity to convert them to Catholicism, even in this second case, evidently enough, the Jesuits were primarily intended to serve the needs of those who were already Catholic, such as merchants, ambassadors, and slaves. As a matter of fact, according to the instruction they received from Rome, the Jesuit missionaries were not supposed to convert Turks, Greeks, Jews, slaves, or heretics, but on the contrary, they were advised to be very cautious in their daily activities. Nevertheless, he reports about their attempts at convincing, for instance, Niceforo from Philippopoli, nowadays Plovdiv, the deacon who worked alongside the Patriarch Jeremias II Tranus, of the necessity of the union with the Roman Church. Actually, Mancinelli proves to be particularly aware of the political and administrative dynamics when it comes to the Orthodox hierarchy, and reports to have been very close to them, considering them yet schismatics and ignorant about faith, but still very straight and chaste. For example, he had the chance to meet a few monks from Mount Athos, Calogeri di Monte Santo della Macedonia. Those men, he writes, are really obedient and bound to their ancient monastic rules. They do not admit among them those who have known women, for they were incredibly chaste. That holy mountain, he continues, is home to 24 monasteries, but the monks are extremely ignorant and gullible when it comes to matter of faith. They were just like peasants, in his opinion. In his pages, he also portrayed an incredible negative image of the English ambassador, for he was Anglican and subsequently considered to be heretic. The ambassador frequently invited Catholic people over for dinner, and before the banquet, he used to pray God and the Queen, recognized as the head of the Anglican Church. Mancinelli and the other Jesuits strictly forbade the Catholics to take part in those feasts, as even the Turks themselves, he says, tengono gli inglesi in vile concetto, chiamandoli luterani ovvero eretici. In other words, the Turks themselves had a negative idea of English Anglicans, considering them to be heretic. It seems to me that in this text, he put much effort into criticizing the other Christians than the Muslims. And even when he reports about the conversions he induced and promoted, more often than not, he talks about renegati, renegades. The only proper Muslims he converted were the ones he encountered in Italy, such as those who were in Florence serving as slaves of the Grand Duke of Tuscany, and those Muslims serving as galley slaves in Naples. I would like to broaden our discussion to look at another final issue. While staying in Constantinople, he took the opportunity to visit marvelous places, he writes, such as gardens and buildings belonging to the Sultan, replete with expensive goods and artwork from Persia, such as finely decorated doors and panels with human figures wonderfully painted on them. Mancinelli, in this regard, sharply notes that, according to the Islamic tradition, it is generally forbidden for people to own or decorate objects with human images, for it is considered to be a form of arrogance towards God. But during his journey, he also had a chance to see a marvelous and well-known temple of Diana standing on a promontory where the Bosporus ends and the Black Sea begins, which, according to Mancinelli, had been converted into an Orthodox church. I honestly did not find any information about the existence of that temple yet. He also testifies to have seen from there, from the Bosporus, Pompey's pillar, which is clearly difficult, if not impossible, I guess. When speaking of the mission he established in the Ottoman capital, one cannot avoid to mention the illustration showing the Topkapi Palace and the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, intending to enrich one of the versions of the Historia, as they represent, once again, a prominent evidence of his documentary intention and curiosity, also shedding further light on the relevance which images and pictures bear within his missionary experience. Here we have a few images. This is, for example, an illustration showing the variety of hats and turbans which people used to wear in the Ottoman Constantinople. We do not know whether he painted those pictures himself, but still they represent a very interesting testimony. Mancinelli himself, however, asserts to have experienced mystical phenomena and visions for many years. In his Historia, we can also find another outstanding image entitled Immagine del sacerdote quanto alla parte celeste, a dense compendium of his life and spiritual experiences conceived and described as if they were the panels of an altarpiece. In this regard, we can assume that even if we cannot say whether he painted the illustration which illuminate his Historia or not, at least, as was the case with the last image we mentioned, he played a key role in conceiving them. When it comes to using the Historia as a source, we should be careful, as the Historia is first of all a literary text, an autobiography, even if it bears an undeniable historical and cultural value. So I guess the information, both visual and textual, which Mancinelli provides, needs to be carefully verified as much as possible. Furthermore, we can claim that in writing his Historia, Mancinelli uses first-hand information, probably combined with news and information which he derives from later sources we had access to, as was the case, for example, with the description of Constantinople published by Julius in 1561, which represent the bedrock of his own description containing the aforementioned De Missione Patrum Societati Jesu, as it has been noted by Vincenzo Ruggeri in his article on the matter. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Silvia. And now I would like to invite anyone who has any questions for our three speakers. I know there has been a communication in the chat for about questions, but maybe some of those things would be nice, like if they were shared and discussed live, like in front of everyone. So please do feel free to ask the questions. Andrew? Please. Andrew, we cannot hear you. I think your microphone is off.
Thank you. Those were really good papers. I enjoyed them tremendously. A question for Boris. When Sava is actually compiling the Nomocanon, is this part of a program that he's got, you think, for sort of pastoral care in Serbia? Is it the part of a grand scheme, or is it something that he needs as a bishop?
Thank you very much, and actually a very important question, because I forgot completely to mention that the Nomocanon was compiled after the proclamation of the Autocephalous Church in 1219. So it's definitely compiled sometimes after 1220. Therefore, it is something he needed in order to establish an autocephalous church, and in a way to let's say, legally introduced Christianity in the country, even though the Serbs were Christianized a couple of centuries before. But at this point, it was needed because in 1217, his brother received the crown from Pope. Therefore, now the state was, according to medieval standards, completely independent, having an independent archbishop, not dependent on Constantinople. And on one side, on the other, the kingdom was independent, and Nomocanon was needed actually as a part of a strong program of completely independent medieval Serbian kingdom, which needed also its church to be fully established by the bishops ordained by Sava, therefore to make a completely independent Serbian church in the way that even though some bishops were Greek and still remained loyal to Sava, like the bishop of Prizren, more or less it became now a completely new autocephalous church, which needed Nomocanon as its legal grounds.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Günther?
Yeah, thank you very much. Unfortunately, I didn't listen to the paper, and but the matter is very interesting for me. The memoirs of Konstantin Mihailović, and to compare to the text written by Sava. But I think the situation for both, as you wrote in your abstract also, was of course very different. But I would like to draw to certain facts concerning your attention to certain facts of the paper of the memoirs of Constantine, and especially for one point is when it was probably written, and I think it was I had showed that it must have been written about 1481. That is after the death of Mehmed II. So this was it is to deduce by the subscription in the Polish version. You know, we have two versions broadly, a Polish and a Czech tradition. I didn't know if you mentioned the book, the translation, English translation by Suchek.
Mm-hmm.
Did you mention it? Okay.
Yes, and
it was not in the abstract. And I would like to draw your attention also to, or the audience, to a second ameliorated version of the German translation by Renate Lachmann. She's a Slavicist, and she made the first translation, which was also commented by me and a colleague of who is Arabist. And this Memoiren eines Janitscharen oder Türkische Chronik was published in 2010 in Paderborn, and the introduction written by Renate Lachmann was completely revised with a view to the situation, or to the Bosnian history and literary history after the Balkan Wars in 1990, you know, in this time. And I think this is a very interesting introduction. And of course also, and it would be a last point interesting to compare what was written by Constantine about the Islam together with other similar treatises about written by captives who served in the Ottoman Empire after the death after the fall of Constantinople. For example, there is an Italian text and a German captive from Siebenbürgen, from the Georg Septem Castrensis, and they also wrote very similar treatises. First their own memoirs, and then also they gave texts about the Murray coutume, the behavior of the Turkic people, and so on. This is a very interesting phenomenon of these texts, and I think so. Yeah, it's just what I wanted to add. Perhaps it's a pity that I missed your paper.
Thank you very much, Professor Prinzing. I'm very glad. I'm very honored to hear these comments, and I can only say that I know Renate Lachman's translation with your edition. I have it copied from here library in Novi Sad. I think it's the 70th edition. I don't know if
1975 it was.
Yes, 1975. I'm not sure whether in Novi Sad, in Matica Srpska, there is no this new translation. Maybe I'll check it out in Belgrade for the newest translation.
I can write it if you send me an email to my address, uni-mainz.de, and then we can exchange.
I will send you an email as soon as possible. It will be great to have that new.
You're welcome.
I also mentioned in my when I spoke about my topic that there is also a Danish 2-volume edition, which is quite interesting. Some Danish Slavists made it, and we have it here in Novi Sad, even the 2 volumes.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Boris and Günther. Maybe you can continue writing yourselves these details, if you don't mind. But there have been another interesting questions going on, like in the chat, and I think that that would be worth asking Vladislav Atanasov if you would maybe ask Silvia and maybe open that question for everyone to share in. Or Silvia, if you want to say something about that or answer the question.
Yes. I'm trying to typing, but it's Vladislav asked me where to find these accounts. Actually, this story has not been published yet. I'm working on it. I have some transcriptions, so if you need, I can send it to you. No problem. The other text I mentioned, the one in Latin, has been published by Pirri, a Jesuit, a few decades ago, and more recently by Ruggeri. So if you want to look at them, I just can send via email, no problem at all. Then I have another question. Yes, I found this kind of information, but as far as I'm concerned, to my knowledge, it was quite common in the Balkan context when Catholic priests were not available. Catholic folk easily went to Orthodox priests, and this was a problem for the missionaries, especially after the 17th century, when they were trying to Catholicize according to the Tridentine norm the Catholic community living in the Balkans, and that was a kind of conflict that occurred very frequently because missionaries wanted to administer sacraments exclusively, but this was not possible because there were few priests in the Balkans, few Catholic priests, and often, as I said, it happened that Catholic people went to Orthodox priests or even to Muslims to administer sacraments or stuff. I don't know if I answered to your question.
Yeah, thank you, Silvia. Are there any other questions?
If I may, just small remark because of Boris' paper. Excuse this advertisement because just before 1 month there appeared book on Slavic sources devoted to Islam. As an idea, it may be compared to Christian-Muslim relations, a bibliographic history mentioned yesterday by Professor Printing. Of course, it cannot be compared as a volume because it's just one book, not 18. I will show you just it was written by team of researchers from our university, Zofia Brzozowska, Mirosław Jerzy Leszka, and Teresa Wolnicka. Muhammad and the Origin of Islam in the Byzantine Slavic Literary Context. So if you are interested in what Sava has written, included in his Nomocanon, every text presented in the Sava's Nomocanon is addressed here. So excuse me this advertisement. Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much, Jan. I think that this will be very important source for people who are interested in this question. I don't know, Silvia, whether you want to answer still the last question which has been popped up in the chat.
Is there another one?
I think that there is one. Where can I find his account about his impressions of the Orthodox Christians in Constantinople, and especially about Patriarch Jeremiah?
Yes, I answered. I received the email address of Vladislav Atanasov. So.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's all right.
Mm-hmm. Then, if there are no more questions, then I would like to thank the speakers and also Jan for his support. And I think that maybe we can conclude this wonderful day of presentations, and we still have a day to look forward to. So thank you very much. Andrew.
Thank you. As we are finishing the panels devoted to heresies and heresiology, I would like to say you thanks for joining us and answering to our invitation. Of course, the conference is not finishing now, but this part with heresies has finished already. Thank you very much for everyone for his.
Jan, I think that Andrew wanted still to say something, but Andrew, your microphone is off, so you have to.
No, I just wanted to wave goodbye and
okay.
Thank you very much to everybody. Sorry.
Then have a good evening, all of you. It was wonderful to meet you.
Thank you and have a good evening.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.